On April 25, 1945, a patrol from the 69th Infantry Division, United States Army, crossed the Mulde River at Torgau in central Germany and met a patrol from the 58th Guards Rifle Division, Soviet Army. This moment, which became known as the Elbe Day meeting, the link-up at the Elbe, has been photographed, celebrated, and commemorated many times over the 80 years since it happened. The photographs show American and Soviet soldiers shaking hands, embracing, laughing on the wreckage of a bridge over the Elbe River. They look like men who have been at war for years and are, for a brief and uncomplicated moment, simply glad to see other men who have also been at war for years. What I want to tell you about is what it took to produce that moment, from both sides. Let me start with the distance. The Soviet Army had fought westward from the outskirts of Moscow, through Kursk, through the liberation of Kiev, through Poland, through the wreckage of Warsaw, through Belorussia, through the Vistula Oder operation that in January 1945 advanced 400 kilometers in under 3 weeks, the fastest sustained advance of any army in the war to that point. By April 1945, the Soviet forces on the eastern approach to Torgau had fought approximately 2,000 miles of continuous campaign in conditions ranging from the burned earth of the summer 1941 retreats to the winter offensives of 1944 and 1945. The American forces at Torgau had come from the western direction. The 69th Infantry Division had landed in France in January 1945 and fought through the Rhineland, across the Rhine, and into Germany. They were a seasoned division by April 1945, but they had not fought the length of campaign the Soviet forces facing them had. The link-up was not accidental. Both commands had been working toward it. General Eisenhower and Marshal Zhukov had coordinated the lines of advance and stop lines through a series of communications that defined where each force would halt. Torgau was within the designated link-up zone. What I want to emphasize is the specific act required of both sides on April 25th. Lieutenant Albert Kotzebue, 69th Infantry Division, led a patrol that crossed the Mulde River to the Elbe at Strela, 9 miles south of Torgau, and met a Soviet patrol there. This was the first documented contact. He radioed back to division headquarters. At Torgau itself, a second American patrol under 2nd Lieutenant William Robertson crossed the Elbe on a damaged bridge and raised an improvised American flag, sheets from a house with paint from a hardware store, on the ruins of Torgau Castle. A Soviet patrol under Lieutenant Alexander Silvashko of the 173rd Rifle Regiment saw it from the far bank. Silvashko's patrol reached them on the bridge. I want to stop here and describe what these two officers were actually doing, because it is easy to receive these events as the automatic conclusion of a large historical movement, and to miss the specific act required. Robertson and Silvashko were officers of two armies that had never fought together, whose countries' governments were already, beneath the surface of wartime alliance, beginning the process of strategic tension that would define the post-war world. They spoke different languages. They had been fighting on opposite ends of the largest military conflict in human history for 4 years, and they had been advancing toward each other for weeks, and they had been told to link up, and now they were on a bridge over the Elbe River in the middle of what was still a combat zone, and the war was not yet over, and they shook hands. The photographs from Torgau show what I am trying to describe better than I can describe it in words. They show the moment after the handshake, or several moments after, when the formal requirement of the occasion had been fulfilled, and what remained was two groups of men who had fought across the same war from opposite directions and had reached the same place. The expressions are not triumphant. They are, and I choose this word with some care, relieved. Both sides. The Soviet soldiers look at the American soldiers with the expression of men who have been fighting alone for a very long time, and have found others who have been fighting alone for a very long time, and for a moment that is enough. There is a photograph, perhaps the most widely circulated image from Torgau, of Robertson and Silvashko embracing on the bridge, both of them grinning, both of them with the quality of men in whom something that has been held very tightly is briefly allowed to release. Robertson is 22 years old in the photograph. Silvashko is 24. I am going to give you some numbers, because the numbers are part of what I need you to hold in your mind when you look at that photograph. By the time of the Elbe link-up, the Soviet Union had suffered an estimated 8 to 9 million military deaths and between 14 and 17 million civilian deaths in the course of the war with Germany. These are estimates. The precise figures remain a matter of historical debate, but the order of magnitude is not. The Soviet casualty rate in the 4 years of the Eastern Front campaign was the largest sustained military and civilian casualty event in human history. The United States lost approximately 418,000 military personnel in the entire war across all theaters, including the Pacific. This is not a small number. These are 418,000 men and women, and their loss was real and permanent. And it is a fraction of what the country whose soldiers were grinning on the other side of that bridge had endured. The alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union during World War II was formed in the conditions of a common enemy and sustained under enormous strain. The two governments did not trust each other. They disagreed on strategy, on post-war political arrangements, on the timing of the Second Front, on virtually every substantive question beyond the one they shared, that Germany had to be stopped. What happened at Torgau on April 25, 1945, was two groups of soldiers reaching the end of that shared question. Silvashko's patrol invited Robertson's patrol to the Soviet headquarters at Lechwitz. Robertson went. There was food. There was vodka. There were toasts. There were attempts at conversation in two languages, several of which have been documented in memoirs by soldiers on both sides, and which have uniformly the quality of men communicating through the particular universal language of having seen the same thing from different directions. Robertson said, in a later account, "We had a common cause regardless of our governments." The Elbe Day meeting was declared an official link-up at approximately 4:40 p.m. on April 25, 1945. 13 days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The photograph of Robertson and Silvashko on the bridge has been used in the 80 years since to represent many different things. It has been used to represent Allied solidarity, to represent American-Soviet friendship, to represent the end of the war in Europe, to represent the hope of a post-war world that did not in the event materialize. I prefer to look at it as what it actually was. Two 20-something men on a damaged bridge over the Elbe who had been fighting toward each other for years, and who, when they got there, shook hands and then embraced, and who were glad, genuinely unreservedly glad to see each other. The war was not quite over. The political tensions that would become the Cold War were already forming. None of it was resolved by that bridge. But the bridge held, and for the moment that was enough.